Hello, and welcome to the RICS World Built Environment Forum webinar series. Today's session is in partnership with ESRI. I would like to take this opportunity to thank A-Site, who are the World Built Environment Forum's lead tech partner. My name is Anil Sahani, and I'll be your moderator today. Today, over the next 1 hour, we'll be looking at, do you know where your infrastructure project is? Location-based data for improved project performance. You may be thinking that the title is a bit cheeky, but maybe not. Let me share a story with you. In 2015-2016 timeframe, without naming the state, a state DOT actually forgot to include a $70.5 million estimated cost to construct a new interchange on a large transportation program. So the program's estimated cost increased from 715 million at enumeration to about 1.2 billion in August 2016. Obviously, the forgotten or the missed interchange was not the only problem with the project budget and other related performance issues. So clearly, where is your infrastructure project is very relevant in today's large infrastructure projects and programs. So truly, today's session is about data and how data can enhance collaboration, drive evidence-led decision-making, and improve the design, construction, operation, maintenance, and end-of-life workflows. As a recent study suggested that better data strategies could perhaps save the global construction industry an estimated $1.85 trillion. More specifically, today we will also discuss the importance of location data for improved project performance over its entire life cycle. One project at a time, from initiation all the way over to handover, and every asset that the project produces to its entire life cycle. So let me begin by introducing the panel of experts that we have assembled today to discuss the various issues related to the main topic that I just described. Today we have Josh Amon, who's a planner GIS analyst with Parametrics. Hi, Josh.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm a planner and a GIS analyst out of Portland, Oregon in the United States.
Thank you. Mark Goldman, who's the Director of Architecture, Engineering, and Construction Industry Solutions for ESRI.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Anil, and thank you, RICS. We go a little whiles back in a number of ways, worked together, Anil, on a few different projects, from quantification to here talking about GIS in the AEC industry. So I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Mark, for your continuing support. I enjoy working with you. Next, we have Sadia, who's having, I think, a little issues joining. I know she's about to join. So she's the Chief of Program and Project Controls and Virtual Design and Construction for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. She's a very strong supporter of RICS, and I'm really excited to have her on this panel. Last but not least, Francisco Pineda, who's a faculty at Columbia University. He is the America's infrastructure lead for GLEADS, and he coincidentally was instrumental in President Biden's Build Back Better program in its early stages during the transition of the incoming administration. So we're really very happy that Francisco could join the panel today. Hi, Francisco.
Hi, Anil. Thank you for having me here, and excited to join and learn. I always learn so much from these events, and glad to be a part of it.
So we have registrations from many parts of the world, and you're always welcome as attendees for your active involvement. Do please submit questions to our panel, as it really helps to bring the conversation to life. If you have any questions, you can submit the questions via our chat feature, our questions feature. We'll pick those up. I'll try and integrate those because I can see them as they flow into our discussion points that we have created. And if not, we'll try and address those towards the end of the session. So let's begin our conversation. My goal is to speak as little as possible. So my questions, I will try to keep them shorter than the answers given by our experts. That'll be my guiding principle. So let's begin without any further delay with our first question, which I would like Francisco to begin addressing, and I'm requesting other panel members to also jump in as needed for that particular question. So, Francisco, I know you are in the process of creating a digital transformation framework and strategy, especially for large infrastructure projects and programs. So my first question to you is, what role are digital information systems playing in helping us build back better? And more specifically, today, we are very much focusing on value for money, so on budget.
This is a difficult question for a lot of reasons. As you know, we are a very fragmented sector that is really across all four sectors, economic sectors, and across multiple industries. So I think, like in every other industry and in every other sector, there is a key focus in digitalizing many other work streams, in digitalizing many other business processes, in both safeguarding their data, making sense of the data, and detecting important signals and information from that data. And obviously within our specific sector, A, E, and the C part of this, as well as in the asset management and the usage, you have different players that are requiring different type of capabilities. Are you a subcontractor and a manufacturer that is perhaps taking a much more manufacturing-based lens to incorporating digital processes into your fabrication? Are you a general contractor that plays more of a supervisory role and is perhaps looking to make both at the higher end of this pyramid, the reporting more transparent, more continuous, more fluid, and then take that information and be able to query it for important trends, important signals, important dashboards? Or are you an owner who is looking to have a better handle on both project tracking, project controls, governance, developing standards of practice from a supervisory role? And I think for large US agencies and large public sector sponsors, that has been the main, I think, focus and need. New York State's an interesting case study in that the design build legislation has, for the most part, mandated much of the large agencies that are doing building to move away from design bid build. And if you're not familiar with that, it was a process by which large agencies took control of the design process to almost complete DD drawings, and then that would go and get bid out into the market. So they had very strong engineering teams and design teams in-house with a very strong background in the type of digital assets that were being used to design and develop those schematics to be biddable. That's now changed somewhat, with most projects having to be procured in a design build methodology. So obviously their focus is shifting away from developing these drawings to being able to develop them to a point of a 30-40% DD component, and then after handing this over to a contractor, play a project controls role, play a role of being able to extract important trending information, paying of requisitions, especially if there's bank or financed bank financed elements. So long story short, and I haven't given you a great answer because it is so wide, it is so varied, it is so complex. But I think the one red thread across everybody in the AEC industry, and I include the real estate and I include the ultimate asset user, is that this process to both digitalize work streams, make sense of the data, understand how you're going to restructure some very important information in a way that it can be queried, in a way that it can be leveraged, in a way that it can be quickly presented, has been, I think, the big strategic objective. The challenge has been operationalizing those objectives and dealing with what today is, I would call, the messy middle. There's a lot of very, very single and maybe dual use case software that is not integrated, that does not integrate well for a lot of reasons. And I think a lot of these agencies and a lot of the larger general contractors or larger prime contractors are starting to tackle and starting to tackle this challenge of, how do I connect my cost loaded schedule from P6 into my VDC ecosystem? And then, how do I then query this both cost, data, material information to be able to extract X, Y, or Z that I need, perhaps trending on schedules or paying requisitions, and more importantly, if these things end up in claims, how can I use this very rich data set to mine potential important points during the discovery process during claims and litigation. So I'll stop there. And it's not a great answer, but I hope I painted a very complex picture of the landscape we're all somehow trying to make sense of.
Thank you, Francisco. I agree. I think it is a complex picture, but I did find one common theme that in your answer, which was the focus on data. And no wonder 95%, as per some estimates, of the data that we generate on projects over its entire life cycle is never used. And therefore, I guess the new term coming into our sector from other sectors is this dark data, where that data which we create and maybe use once and not use again. So is that something we need to tap into when we talk about project performance and being on budget? Sorry, Mark, I think you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, Francisco, you painted a very broad picture. There's a couple of things that came to mind as you were describing the various types of players in the industry and what digital information systems and maybe digital transformation means to them within their own confines, whether you're a subcontractor and that means going towards digital fabrication and removing a lot of the paper processes that happen within a factory environment, or more broadly, the general contractor who has is managing risk and cost and safety at a higher level. Digital information systems simply are significantly different from those different perspectives. But what it did point to, and in the reference to manufacturing, we've spoken for 20 years or more how the manufacturing industries have been ahead of AEC, have been ahead of the built environment. They've adopted enterprise methodologies around information collection and access. And it seems to me that we're right on the cusp of that in AEC. I know, Anil, on your LinkedIn, I noticed you have Construction 4.0, I think, on your banner, and you've spoken on it in numerous times, the industrialization of AEC. It seems that we're right on the cusp of it, perhaps initiated because of COVID, because of our new working environments where digital connection has replaced the physical connections that many of us have had, and yet we've still conducted our lives, conducted our work. So, and then what you said there, Anil, as well, is about focusing on data. 98% goes unused. I think I got a slide that says that as well, of the massive amounts of information we now collect and organize and hopefully make available to others. The reality is most of it is not being used. A vast majority of it is not being used. And it's up to, I think, companies like ESRI and our counterparts in technology to not just have tools that create information to be stored and fill up new data centers, but to actually have tools that make it easier to access and glean insights from that. We no longer, I think, are measured on our raw intelligence, just being able to answer questions so quickly. We now are measured, in our success professionally is very much based on when we can tap into information that we know exists and use it to make better decisions. And I'm seeing a lot of that in the AEC space because of the embracing of technologies and digital information in ways that just hadn't been seen in just a few years past.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Anil, the second part of this question, Mark's comments are important, that there has been an embracing of this, I think, across the verticals. I think what we saw, at least what I've seen, is that some manufacturers are extremely advanced on the technologies that they've incorporated into their manufacturing systems, their material selections, even the material science work that's come out of the large research institutions. But what we have seen recently is that across the value chain, we're seeing more of that integration happen, or at least the conversation. The second piece on this build back better and on budget or whatever we're building, we can talk about IT and we can talk about software and data and information. I do think there's one component here that's often forgotten. And I remember reading an article from the RAND Corporation that was talking about the big issue with smart cities isn't sensor technologies or collection of data. It's really organizing around A, what and why and where are we doing this for, and B, once we get this information, to Mark's point, is what's the intelligence? A lot of this stuff is perhaps not necessary. If I'm a big owner, I don't need the minutia. I don't need to, develop a tech stack that's, so advanced that I'm losing kind of, sight of the important things that I need as an owner, which is trend, is it on schedule, what are the big issues, et cetera, et cetera. And I think oftentimes we might be re-engineering some of this stuff. But in the building back better and on, building for a modern age and building in a way that makes the work both effective and efficient, not just efficient, is how do we organize? Part of that we've tried to address through procurement methods like integrated project delivery, where there's greater collaboration. There's obviously benefits and drawbacks. Design build has tried to do that too by pushing the risk off to the design builder and integrating the design side of the house with the production side of the house. I think that is as important. How we organize, how we project manage, how we program manage must inform the type of capabilities or the technological capabilities that we leverage and the intelligence that we hope to glean from that. I think at times I've seen both ends of the spectrum, people overinvest and over-engineer and sort of lose sight of the important things that you're supposed to track, or B, they underinvest or underutilize the existing information that's there. And sometimes it's just about rethinking, what do I need to connect? Do I really need to integrate the entire tech stack? Maybe not. Maybe there's just 2 or 3 pieces that I need to figure out how to combine, extracting a database, combining it with another, and figuring out how to query that in a way that I can use to oversee my contractor, oversee my subcontractor, and or measure ultimately whether this product is intended and is being delivered in the way it's intended to be delivered for our clients that are using it.
Thank you very much, both Francisco and Mark. Let me bring Josh into the conversation and move to our next question. Really, Josh, I think you are somebody who sees projects before they really come to folks like us talk about construction. You probably see the bigger picture. You see them in the context. You see them in a scale that folks like me look at a construction site as the worldview or the lenses through which I look at projects. So how are BIM and GIS and their integration and other data streams being combined to improve infrastructure projects and programs? I know that you're working on a large initiative yourself, so really like to hear your views.
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. I think there is, I work on primarily the planning and preliminary design aspects of large mega projects. And what I'm seeing is generally a collaboration where it's almost like a virtual project delivery system. So whereas we used to have, kind of CAD design data in one environment, GIS data for planning and permitting in another environment, we're kind of combining those two together into, it could be as simple as like what we're calling like a project landing page, where all the project partners, whether you're a designer, you're a planner, you're in, project management, or you work for an agency, you're viewing the same information. And it kind of gets at that first question, if you're a designer, maybe 95% of the environmental information is not important to you. But there's 5% that you didn't know existed, that may affect your design. And so we see that play out regularly. In the project I'm working on right now, which is a major bridge replacement on I-5 in between Oregon and Washington, what we're seeing is things like the ability to show designers where development is going to occur based on permitting records and based on site plans and being able to show that spatially to them helps them design better. So they can avoid conflict that might cause excessive acquisition value or maybe extremely impactful to a community. They can identify those in the early design process and avoid conflict later on. So I think in that way, combining whether it's BIM, GIS, CAD, tabular information in one place, and in our case, that's using GIS and some ESRI products, it's been really beneficial, and it leads our discussions. So we'll have meetings that are entirely focused around maybe a web map and showing preliminary designs in that web map, and then asking questions in real time about what the impacts may be, and being able to have various disciplines in the same discussion, looking at the same information, whereas previously they weren't doing that. So in that way, I think we've definitely seen an improvement in terms of the communication and hopefully the what's delivered and the efficiency in that.
I'd love to jump in there if I can.
Sure,
Josh,
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, Josh showed a project just recently. We did a webinar, and you were at our event in Palm Springs talking about the Interstate Bridge project, where the combination of the models in the context that GIS delivers and the ability to bring that information to such a large range of stakeholders allows those who certainly need to weigh in on the project and the program and its direction and early design concepts and other elements that should affect the design, being able to distribute the BIM information and GIS information in just browser environments that we all know how to interact with is affecting the way I think projects are kicked off, and the level of the number of people who are informed on projects certainly impacts the way they then proceed forward. And then ongoing, bringing the information together throughout design into construction, and knowing that you've got, your project is more than just delivering the physical tangible, but your project requirements include, one term or another, a digital twin. The responsibility is to hand over the digital information in a way that the owner can utilize what was thought up in the earliest phases of planning and all the way throughout. So in those cases, the value of a GIS platform with BIM information combined with the tabular data leads to the ability to then potentially at least monitor, if not even automate, some of the infrastructure that's being put in place.
And I think it's we've seen it's a huge added value for the client and the project in total. So, whether you're a DOT who's receiving the project at the end, or you're, involved in the construction of the project itself, these tools don't die. So whereas, in previous iterations of work, things might sit on a shelf or, get logged into a local file system somewhere and never to be seen again, there's kind of incentive here to carry these forward. So to carry these tools forward and leverage them, across the construction, from planning to construction, to just make a better project.
So Josh,
just to add to that, Neil,
sure.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, one great example to this, and my good friend Dennis Leff at the Delta head of VDC, has been incorporating a lot of the GIS capabilities into his existing Revit Navis work in VDC ecosystem, especially with the pile driving package. It's a great example of how, you can sort of leverage additional information and data points, layer it into his existing, VDC workflows, but highlights another limitation. While it's excellent, it's excellent to kind of review both driving of the piles, the testing of the piles, ensuring they're in the accurate position, capping them, and then pouring your foundation, your great foundation. The problem is once you start closing it up, that GIS capability, sort of becomes a bigger challenge. And we're seeing new use cases that are evolving that can expand that. So it's an interesting kind of evolution of how GIS is being blended into an active project and into an existing VDC and BIM kind of ecosystem. But the challenge still, a lot of this work and integrations he had to do himself and sort of program himself to be able to leverage it.
Well, I think it's fair to say it's very promising when Josh mentioned that project team members are receptive to at least viewing and seeing the larger context of the project, seeing permitting data in the area and how a particular bridge project or any other infra project can impact or could be impacted by the surrounding development. Obviously, our end goal would be integration and automation of this information for ease of use. But if the project team members are receptive to this kind of an approach, I think that's a significant step forward. So I think continuing that discussion, Mark, I'd like you to help me with our third question of the day, which really talks about, in these uncertain times, how can tools such as GIS help project and business resilience? We all saw early 2020 project closures. I mean, I don't think in my project management learning and teaching, I ever learned or taught students about project closures. So how is this kind of tool being used by organizations for building project resilience and business resilience?
That's a great topic, and it's one that we found ourselves mobilizing around to try to help at least many industries at ESRI. My focus is on AEC, but how can the information that GIS can deliver, that is location-centric, we take this geographic approach to the way we deliver solutions. We're thinking about things at a high level as well as down to the very granular level. So we spent a fair bit of time back a couple of years ago putting together ourselves and trying to come up with solutions that addressed kind of sort of 2 or 3 areas. One was, how can GIS help businesses themselves be more resilient? How can the knowledge of where people are, knowledge of your supply chain in construction, the ability to bring various types of informations together that typically might not have been analyzed to help make decisions at a time where we were all making things up on the fly, and the more access you had to information of various types made for better decision making in various industries, all industries for that matter. So we spent a fair bit of time looking at how GIS actually can help businesses run themselves better, and that included, in this time of needing to know where your people were working, what assets they had available to do their work, whether that's an office worker suddenly working from their dining room table, or your field workers who need to be armed with digital technologies for processing and communicating and connecting with other folks. So we found our tools being used as a means of managing the human and physical resources that are so critical for construction, that need to be tracked and be available in certain locations at the right time, and GIS is brilliant for location management. For project tracking, some of the things, Francisco, you just mentioned there, as far as the bringing together of VDC and GIS and scheduling, the ability to add, to utilize the time element that GIS has. GIS is more than just location information. It also, at its very core, is temporal as well. It's time-based. So bringing together schedule information, model information in context of various information that you need to collect, traffic, resiliency information such as environmental conditions. All of these different layers brought together allow for decision making in times where you're not certain what is happening next. We had very uncertain times from 2 years ago for a solid 6 months. It really just felt like we were constantly making things up. But having insight to data, having tools that allow you to communicate better, having access to, like I said, these various types of information in cases where, in our industry, BIM and CAD and GIS layers are combined with your locations of your human and physical resources, leads to better project delivery.
Thank you. Francisco, if I may, last time I visited Colombia, you introduced me to a group of students you were working with who had come up with this hard hat. This is pre-COVID, where you can have literally not only location, but other sensing devices embedded in the hard hat to track the construction workers. How do you see now, fast forward with technology being adopted so in an accelerated fashion, how do you see these kind of location-based tools and other tools help projects bounce back from a closure, for example, or from other hiccups, and then similarly, organizations bounce back from starts and stops.
So I guess two parts to your question. Let me tackle the second one first. We were, for the most part, designated as a critical sector during the COVID and the shutdown. So at least in New York and in New York City, we continued to build and we continued to work, and that was an important both social and economic imperative. So the projects, I think today are moving forward at a very fast pace. Going back to Delta, really amazing and a very innovative procurement structure allowed them to advance their schedule by almost 2 years by taking advantage of a slowdown in traffic, airport traffic. So, yes, I think we've seen a very strong and robust economic and construction side of the in the AEC space, and I would actually look at both architectural billings and engineering billing index to see exactly what had happened. In fact, it had slowed down prior to the pandemic, and then in comparison to other sectors and industries, we've been pretty busy. The first part of the question too, it goes back, you're talking about some of the RFID, which is a pretty simple technology. It's been around for decades and just repurposed for a different use case, and then interface with a UI or UX to allow project managers to track workers on site. Yes, there's sort of implications about control and ensuring labor's on site and ensuring that those hours are being put in there, and there's some pushback around that, but it's also around safety. That, you remember, part of their technology allowed you to recognize if somebody had gone horizontal, if somebody had fallen or wasn't getting up. Also allows you to track folks if there's emergency situation. That's one example, but again, it's another example of what I said earlier. A lot of the technology has been single or dual use case for one small part of it. The other part too that's often missed, and I'm pretty critical of that McKinsey article that came up in 2015 that showed both us and agriculture at the bottom of the technology and digitalization stack. I think that's taken entirely out of context. Number one, I think if you look at what's happening in agriculture, a lot of those harvesters are entirely robotic and driven and controlled by integrating GIS and satellite capabilities with driving. And so I don't think we're that behind. The other thing is that we're still dealing with the physical digital divide. This isn't about creating some sort of database or consumer good platform. This is really still dealing with the real world, and only now are we having the processing capabilities to be able to use robotics even in the simplest of forms, right? The visual technologies that are out there, the AV, VR stuff, the LiDAR scanning, all this stuff, and there's so much of it, is only now being able to be integrated because of the very heavy need for processing capability. And then lastly, as an economist, I always view this through the lens, and part of your question is, where do I see this going? I do think we are at an inflection point, partly because not only are the large GCs, and I think a lot of the innovation is happening, the real innovation, not what I call the pretend tech startup, construction tech startup innovation, is happening within VDC groups in the large general contractor and the large subcontractor / manufacturers. They're the ones that have the true technical capabilities to understand what needs to be worked on and integrated, and they're the ones investing. But on the other side of this is the fact that you're seeing a lot of VC and private equity and a lot of strategic buyers buying up startups. So we're seeing a lot of money flowing both from strategic operators like GCs and subcontractors and manufacturers, and a lot of money coming from the private equity VC world, up to 12 billion, I think, this year alone in construction tech. So I think that's going to create a really interesting, I guess, soup of an incentive of people, kind of chasing innovation, chasing application, chasing more integration between the different needs across the sector.
And I chime in and say, I think what's really unique too about what the pandemic has done is take technologies like what you were just describing, Francisco, and say, it used to be you had to be in the room, to be heard and to kind of get your point across or get your technology in place, but now everyone is in the room. None of us are in the room, and we're all in the room at the same time. So I think it's kind of, obviously with a lot of things, it's initiated a much quicker development and dispersion of these tools through the web, whether it's on site or whether it's, something that's more virtual. I think that's really enabled us to, move quickly and possibly in the AEC space more than anywhere else, just because of the requirements.
Excellent. So let's move to our next question. And Sadia, this question is for you. We'll take you up actually on your offer. When we were discussing this question, you mentioned we could write a book on this. I think you have 4 co-authors who will be very happy if you want to take the lead. But in all seriousness, I know you are doing so much work within Port Authority, New York, New Jersey, transforming the way cost management and project controls work in a very large, complex organization on a very large, complex portfolio program and projects in the infrastructure space. So how are organizations, in your view, using digitalization to drive decision making?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna, I was trying to troubleshoot for the past 40 minutes, so I apologize for being a little bit late. But I think one of the things we always have to ask ourselves is, what is the definition of digitalization? And I think that's a very key point to make. At the PA, we actually defined it in 3 ways. So you have digitalization, which is the process of converting information locked into physical documents from analog to digital. And then you have digitization, which is a process of using digitized information to work more simply and effectively with increased importance of digitalization in business, which is more than ever used today. And then we have what we call digital transformation, which Anil, you just touched upon, and that's changing the way we conduct our business. It's about taking a step back and revisiting everything that we do, from our internal systems to interactions between our customers, our clients, and beyond that. So one of the key elements to understanding what we're calling digital transformation is to understand your true potential of technology. And so for us, digital transformation means using technology to create a differentiating way of doing business, to drive growth in our existing market. And there's different definitions, right? You have Brian Solis' definition of DT, which is entirely holistic, and that's the realignment of new investment in technology, business models, processes to derive new value for customers and employees. And, Austria, the municipality government of Austria says that DT means modernization of renewal of business processes and business models supported by IT. But I think there are 3 reasons why digital transformation and digitalization is important. One is the acceleration of change. The pace of digital change is rising exponentially, and it's making it more difficult to maintain a position in the industry as leaders, and it's requiring an acceleration of new digital solutions that are brought into the market. And then the second one is, digital competition. Companies are under an ever-increasing pressure to compete digitally. And, there are long-established business models that are being disrupted by born digital startups. And then the third one is the customer expectations. Customers expect a good experience across all touch points. You have to ensure that their interactions are seamless and exponential. So at the Port Authority, we're using like an OST approach, which is an objective, strategy, and tactics. And it's basically aligned with our agency's mission, which is to keep the region moving. And the overall objective of our digital transformation program is to connect the dots, basically connecting every stakeholder with shared data, process, and technology. And so, like most of the panelists mentioned, some of the tools that we're using are basically all the levels of BIM, GIS, reality capture, which is a part of our overall geospatial strategy. That's basically aligned with our approach, which is the golden thread of information across the project lifecycle. And so essentially that's what we're doing here at the Port Authority, is just that. I mentioned the golden thread of information, and basically that's our key, right? You have to run this information through each one of our projects, through each phases of our project. And the goal is that the information is created once, it's uploaded in real time, and they use it for every stage of the life cycle before it's actually handed over to our facility management and operations group. So, you know, there's a lot to talk about there, and GIS is something that's really big at the Port Authority right now because we have assets that are everywhere. But the objective is to identify the specific location of each of our assets within our portfolio and integrate other data into that common data environment so we can support every one of our projects at every stage and life cycle.
Fantastic answers, Sadia. Really very impressive the way, in a holistic way, you're approaching this. I'd be curious to know, this is not an easy task organization-wide doing digital transformation. What are some of the challenges you face in doing this? Maybe just within cost management and project controls. Is it more of a mindset issue? Is it standards? Is it a lack of data and software tools being available to you, or maybe a mix of all? Could you comment or share something on that?
Sure. I'll be very honest with you. I think it's a mix of all, but most importantly, I think it's a culture change, right? The way the industry is moving, shifting. You know, ultimately what I've realized throughout this whole experience of, you know, having this digital transformation initiative at the Port Authority is it's essentially change management. We're changing the way we do business, right? And that's key. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have. Something that we're doing just to make sure, I mean, we are a very big agency. I'm sure you guys are all aware of that. But we have to make sure that our supply chain can meet the requirements that we are putting out there. So one of the things is that we're in constant communication with our contractors, with our design consultants, say, hey, this is the route we're taking. These are the softwares we're using. You know, in essence, get with the program, right? So there's a lot of that, but I'd say really it's just the change management, the cultural change is the biggest hurdle that we're dealing with when it comes to this transformation and project controls.
Thank you. So let's move to our next discussion topic. And Mark, I need your help on this one, where we talk about this next question, I think, which is related to what do organizations need to consider when implementing a digital transformation, digitalization strategy?
Yeah, actually really good timing there, Sadia. You brought up points that I was going to actually address knowing this question was coming up, which is change management is perhaps the greatest consideration to recognize that once, you know, assuming you're on track to make some kind of a digital transformation, you're on a path where you have, you know, a goal in mind to use technology as that competitive edge, that differentiator, or perhaps even just a catch up because you've fallen behind. Simply choosing a technology platform and having a plan in place to train people is great, but the cultural elements of change, recognizing the pace in which a particular organization is ready to change in general, and then in certain workflows, the term has been used a few times here, this is a golden thread or a red thread that runs through your organization as far as information flow goes. Those threads are your workflows. Those are your opportunities to improve and refine and use digital means to be more competitive and more productive. So identifying those is a critical success factor. To know that certain flows of information are going to change and there's benefits from that, and being prepared to explain those and communicate to the broad stakeholders or the small group who might be impacted by this digitalization. And recognize that, again, just because technologies have been decided at some certain level within an organization, those who have to adopt them have their own backgrounds, their own levels of understanding, their own desires to change. So bringing in change management experts into projects of any scale, digital transformation is a critical success factor. I really like the way you broke the term digitalization down into three areas, and specifically The definition you used for digital transformation is one that I was just using the last couple of weeks, that it is going on everywhere in our industry. If you are not in the midst of digital transformation, that is using technology to stay competitive, remain competitive, or find a competitive edge, you're not long for life in this very competitive environment right now, where technology has become a mainstay. I was as guilty as any using those McKinsey stats and those prior to that, Francisco, tech shaming our industry, that we weren't as advanced and such, but we've either gotten over that or it just doesn't matter right now. Technology is part of our industry. Technology is part of the AEC workflow, and finding those workflows, finding those golden threads, and being prepared for change management, I think, is one of the critical success factors.
Yeah, and I'd add something that's really simple, but I think is imperative to success of change management is advocates. So when you're talking about that golden thread, and the idea that golden thread impacts certain people in certain, portions of a plan or a design or a construction project, identifying those people and making them your proponents or your teammates in whatever transformation you're trying to do, I think is critical in terms of having that, trickle down to everybody and get buy-in across an organization or a project.
Thank you. Sadia, maybe we can continue what you started the discussion and maybe take it one step deeper, talk about data and interoperability in the next question. So how do you see, especially in your role as somebody who looks at estimating, cost management, project controls, VDC, how do you see data quality and interoperabilities? Is it an obstacle still, or we have largely overcome this issue?
So, we have a data governance strategy, which is a quarter of that approach is to data assurance, right? So you have to have an understanding of the hierarchy of how all of this fits together. So what we did is we designed a data assurance quality procedure that ensures that what we receive and the data, and to ensure that we receive the data that we need on time and the quality we require. So we do have these quality targets. Now, the way that our GIS, BIM, LiDAR is all collected, all of that, again, goes back to the golden thread of information management. The data is not necessarily combined, but are used in a combination, and I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. Are there standards and formats that, we have? Yeah, for certain data, we do. We do have open standards for our BIM requirements that everyone has access to. So I think one thing that you have to kind of keep in mind is we really have to think beyond the 3D model that people often associate when we talk about modeling. The true vision for a true data model is the use of what we're also introducing is model-based systems engineering. And that's where you're creating a semantic model which links everything together using one common language. And that includes BIM, but also the schedule, the risk, the cost, scope, spec sections, and O&M information. So basically everything. And so that model central approach that we have is actually going to help us with our requirements management and change control through a mature configuration of management procedures, which actually use systems engineering and our data governance framework to link it all together. I don't know, some of that approach that we are kind of, using, this whole model-based approach rather than document-based approach is a form of our central, it's a central point of our common data environment. I know HS Royal 2 in the UK used this approach, and it helped quite a bit to identify thousands of discrepancies in the requirements. And I'm also learning that systems engineering is actually mandated on all projects in Holland as well. So that's our approach, and how we can really assure that the data quality and integrity and the interoperability is assured when we are trying to integrate all of our systems together.
I think I really like your comment on not getting stuck in this debate about interoperability, rather focus on model-driven and data-centric approaches to your work processes. And then secondary to that, obviously, comes the issue of data and data interoperability. So it becomes a secondary discussion, and the focus shifts towards the way of working and how that in itself can solve some of the problems. So our next question is really about sharing your project success experiences, what you see working broadly on projects related to digital transformation, data, and perhaps each one of you, but I'm going to start with Francisco. Maybe examples, Francisco, if you can share. I know you're working on a strategy of digital transformation. What are some of the early successes that you're seeing in that?
I'm sorry, I had a lag on my mute. So good question. I don't, there's a lot here. We've all got so many battle scars and so many experiences. But let me just maybe approach this from another perspective. And I think everybody touched on this. Sadia really dug into this point, which is this is about organizing, and this is about taking a view on what are the important business processes. And the transformation is not as much digital as it might be organizational, and to some extent, introspective in how we need to understand the data, the usage. Not everything is important. But let me give you one example of where this has not happened well. Oftentimes with both very large mega projects and very large agencies, you have an extension of staff like arrangement with your technical advisors, consultants, right? And what happens is that each one of these from a different firm might run a certain vertical: your project controls, your schedule management, your cost controls, your commercial management. And they all have not only their own system, not only are they using their own software, and this goes back to Sadia's point, she's done an incredible job both leading this effort and really how to think about to lead this effort in an organization like the Port Authority and with projects as diverse as the ones that her department and her team is leading. But you're dealing with sort of this basic reality that you don't have control over this staff. These are mainly consultants that work for other firms. So now how do you transfer that data, right? So you want to create a common data language and an understanding, but oftentimes it's as basic as, well, you have another firm doing your schedule management, a third firm doing your project controls, and even that basic warehousing or migration of data from consultant to owner is almost non-existent. I think that's one of the low-hanging fruit to figure out, to manage. I think this can even be addressed contractually through Division 0, Division 1 of the contracts. This is some of the stuff that's not happening. And Sadia's point with the Europeans, the Europeans were one of the first to introduce BIM mandates. And I remember the story where one of our city agencies did the same, only to find that the industry was so far ahead on their usage of BIM and VDC that the agency itself that had the mandate was unable to deal with some of these higher tech capabilities that were being submitted to them. So I'm kind of going all over the place just because there's a lot of these examples, and I think just stop and think for a second, which is what Sadia was trying to highlight. What do we need? We don't need all of it. And if we want it, are we prepared for it? This agency, for example, I'm not going to call out, it sounded great. They read a couple of great articles. They saw, TfL doing it. They saw others doing it, but they didn't take a step back to assess whether they had the capability to do it, the resourcing, the funding. And that's a big issue with public sector agencies. A lot of this stuff, needs to be funded and provisioned years in advance. And I would say the second part is solve small problems. A lot of times, I always tell this story that, this 80 or 90% of your problems come from 1 or 2% of the partners you're working with. And I think similarly with projects delivery and projects of success, usually the root cause or the bottleneck is one, two, or three things. And I think, I think you should both take a big strategic view, the way that Saudi and the Port Authority has done, but you can and should also use an incremental view of where are my bottlenecks? Are they because of technological issues? Are they because of organizational issues? Are they because of, other digital physical interfaces as well as contractual interfaces?
I think to your first point, Francisco, I've been saying for a long time with not many people listening to me, but data in our sector hides behind contractual boundaries. And I think that's what you're saying. So hopefully we can solve that puzzle fairly rapidly through some collaborative forms of contracting. I know we have only 3 minutes left, so this could be an opportunity for Mark, Josh, Sadia to maybe use this prompt or any closing statement that you may want to give on this topic. Mark?
Yeah, I'll just use this one to point to one project recently that I heard about, saw some examples, saw them demonstrated, which was a bridge project, the Norwalk, Connecticut Walk Bridge Project, HNTB, working on it, bringing together GIS and BIM and reality capture and IoT sensors on the machine room at the top of this drawbridge where construction is taking place right next door, where they now have real-time feedback on the seismic conditions as they're driving piles near this existing bridge, seeing whether or not the bridge is deflecting and whether they should be lifting up the centerpiece at certain points given the conditions of seismic activity created by their construction activity. Just the combination of digital technologies brought together by this company who's been building bridges for 100 years, seeing their early work and seeing this most recent, almost space age, use of technology. They're doing things you just could not do safely, accurately in the past. The level of risk that's being reduced, the predictability that is in place in AEC now is really astounding and refreshing. So we're doing this not just for the sake of digitalization, we're delivering projects better through the use of technology, and that's exciting to see.
Josh, in maybe about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would just say, adding on to what Mark said and Francisco, is basically by sharing all this information, having more eyes on the information in the project, I think you can identify those, Francisco, you said, like more accurately, those 10% or one or two issues that are causing 90% of the problems. So more eyes means more identification of potential issues.
Sadia, any examples or last minute thoughts?
Yeah, I know a lot of companies right now are getting ready for the next big wave of advancing their digitalization strategy. I know I've been spending the past 2 years in executing a digitalization strategy for VDC and project controls. And I'd have to say from experience and lessons learned for those who are interested, we really took the time to rewrite our requirements, our standards, and guidelines based on the need for accurate, relevant, and consistent data to support your digitalization. And so one lesson learned for VDC, we invested in new technology to take advantage of our BIM and CAD data, and we've created new methods of using that data to actually improve scheduling, estimating, and sustainability. So to integrate the two subunits, VDC and project controls, I think it's essential to create a series of data dictionaries and classification dictionaries, which are actually mandated for us by the contractors to use to ensure that the data is actually fit for purpose. And I think I heard a lot of common themes when it comes to data, digital transformation, change management, but it ultimately starts from there. I mean, you have an end in mind, but how do we get to that point? And I think those are things that, we did. We have a lot of work that we did at the Terminal 1 airport where we've created a number of processes and applications to collect and assure and store our asset data for turnover to facilities. But ultimately, you have to work to ensure that the solutions can be scaled across what we call our department or our agency to really enable the benefit to be realized on other projects. So there's an investment, but you should also make sure that it's fit for purpose and you can scale it across, for other projects in the area.
Thank you so much.
That's it. I was going to talk about solutions and technologies. I know the construction industry is moving towards machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I think somebody mentioned, IoT. But all of this kind of links to that. But in order to get to that, I really think that one should focus on, the requirements and systems engineering.
Thank you. Well said. So with that, I'm going to start closing the session first by thank you, the panel, and also thanking ESRI for partnering with us on this webinar. As a reminder, we will be publishing a recording and written summary of this webinar, as well as whatever material was presented on our website. So do feel free to share those with your professional networks. Please take a few moments to let us know what you thought of today's session by completing the online poll, which will appear on your screens at the end of the webinar. Please do join us for another webinar in the future. Please see the website for further details. You can also watch any previous webinars on similar topics that you may have missed previously. Once again, I would also like you to look at the QR code on this slide and use that to get in touch with ESRI and see if they can directly connect with you. With that, I'd like to thank ASITE, the World Built Environment Forum's lead tech partner. We invite you to join us in the World Built Environment Forum Global Summit, which is in Dubai in January 2022, alongside the Expo 2020, the program focusing on the livable city, agile, healthy, and resilient. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where you can receive additional news about our program. You can also use our WBF app from the App Store or Google Play, where you can access latest innovative global thought leadership content across the built environment. So with that, this is Anil Sahani, and until next time, goodbye.